The medbay on the Dawn Crest was always cold. Una preferred it that way. Cold air kept her focused. Cold air reminded her body to stay still, to stay small, to stay careful. She stood behind her instrument table and ran a scanner over the arm of a Rethke engineer who had cut himself on a broken panel. The little creature winced, and Una pulled the scanner back half an inch further from his skin. She never got close. That was the rule. That was the only rule that mattered. Una was Velhari. Her people were tall and silver-skinned, with eyes that glowed faintly in low light, like moons caught underwater. They were beautiful in the way that storms were beautiful. Admired from a distance, feared up close. The Velhari carried bioelectric currents inside their bodies, flowing beneath the skin like hidden rivers. Through touch, they could share emotions, heal minor wounds, or, if the current surged, stop a heart in a single beat. Among her people, touch was sacred. It was ritual. It was never casual, never careless, never given without meaning. And for Una, it was forbidden. Not by anyone else, by herself. She finished treating the Rethke and sent him away with a nod. No smile, no parting words. The engineer shuffled out, and Una cleaned her instruments in silence. She wore 2 layers of gloves, thick insulating gloves over a thinner pair beneath. She wore long sleeves. She wore a high collar. Every inch of her skin was covered, always, even in the safety of an empty room. The door chimed, and a human walked in. He was not very tall for a human, but he moved like someone who took up more space than his body needed. His dark hair was messy, pushed back from his forehead with what looked like engine grease. He had a burn on his left forearm, small, red, and blistering. A plasma tool accident, probably. He smiled at her like they were old friends. "Hey," he said, "got a little cook down in engineering. Nothing serious, I think." Una looked at the burn. She gestured to the exam chair without speaking. He sat down and rolled up his sleeve, offering his arm. She pulled a burn kit from the cabinet and opened it on the table between them. She worked quickly, applying cooling gel and a thin layer of synthetic skin, all with long-handled tools. She did not touch him. "I'm Taiho," he said. "Junior engineer. I've been on the ship about 3 weeks now, but I don't think we've met." "We have not," Una said. "Well, now we have." He grinned. "You're the Velhari medic, right?" "Una?" She gave a single nod. Taiho watched her work. His eyes moved to her gloves. The double layer, the careful way she kept her fingers far from his skin, even though the tools were already creating distance. Most people did not notice. He noticed. "Those gloves look heavy," he said. "Don't they get in the way?" "They are protocol," Una said. "Really? I've seen Velhari doctors work barehanded before." "I am not other doctors." He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then he nodded. "Fair enough." He flexed his arm when she finished and whistled softly. "That's good work. Feels better already. Thanks, Una." She turned away to clean the tools. He left. The door closed behind him, and the medbay was quiet again. Una stood still for a long time. She could still feel it. The warmth that had risen from his skin. Even through the gloves, even through the tools. Humans ran hot. Their blood was warm. Their emotions were loud. And they touched everything. They touched each other constantly. Hands on shoulders, arms around waists, palms pressed together in greeting. Una had watched them since she came aboard. They were the most reckless species in the Galactic Cooperative, and the most confusing. She did not understand how they could be so careless with something so dangerous. That night, alone in her quarters, Una removed her gloves. She did this only in private, only when the door was locked and the lights were low. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands. They were pale silver, long-fingered, elegant by Velhari standards. Faint lines of light traced beneath the skin, her bioelectric channels glowing softly in the dark, as these hands had killed a child. She closed her eyes and the memory came, as it always did, sharp and unwelcome. She had been young, a trainee. A small Velhari boy had been brought into the clinic, seizing, his tiny body shaking on the table. The senior medics were busy. Una had been the only one close enough to reach him. She had grabbed his hand. Instinct, nothing more. The desperate need to hold him still, to tell him through touch that he was not alone. Her current had surged. She did not know why. She did not know how. One moment the boy was seizing, and the next he was still, completely still. His heart had stopped. The monitors screamed. The senior medics rushed in. They tried to bring him back. They could not. Una remembered the silence that followed. How she remembered looking down at her hands and seeing the fading glow of the current that had killed him. She remembered the boy's mother in the hallway and the sound she made. Not a scream, but something quieter and worse. A sound like all the air leaving a room. The Velhari Council had declared her severed. It meant she was exiled from touch, forbidden to make physical contact with any Velhari, stripped of her place in the community, marked as dangerous. She had accepted it. She had agreed with it. She had looked at her hands and thought, yes, these should never touch anyone again. Not Velhari, not anyone. Ever. She had joined the Galactic Cooperative Fleet because it was the furthest she could get from home. She had served on 3 ships before the Dawn Crest. Always behind gloves, always behind distance, always alone. When in the chief medical officer's office 2 decks above, Suman sat at her desk and read Yuna's file for the 4th time. She was a human woman with sharp eyes and a jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete. She was also Taiho's older sister. Though they looked nothing alike, she was all edges where he was all warmth. Suman closed the file and leaned back in her chair. Captain Do-Wan stood in the doorway, arms folded. Well, he asked. She's the best medic I've ever worked with, Suman said. Her diagnostic accuracy is near perfect. Her treatment outcomes are better than mine, and I've been doing this for 15 years. But, Suman rubbed her forehead, but she's carrying something that's going to break her if she doesn't let someone help. She won't talk about it. She won't let anyone within arm's reach. She's built a wall out of those gloves, and she thinks the wall is keeping everyone safe. Do-Wan was quiet for a moment. Is she dangerous? No, Suman said. She's afraid. There's a difference. He nodded slowly and left. Down in her quarters, Una pulled her gloves back on. She flexed her fingers inside the thick fabric and felt the current hum quietly beneath her skin. Restless and waiting, always waiting. She would not let it out. She would never let it out again. She had made that promise over a small boy's body, and she would keep it until her last breath. She turned off the lights and lay in the dark, hands folded over her chest like a body laid to rest, and waited for sleep that would not come. The Dawn Crest docked at Way Station Maru on a Tuesday by the ship's clock, though time meant very little this far from any sun. The Way Station was a massive spinning ring of metal and light, hanging in the dark between star systems like a coin dropped in an ocean. Thousands of species passed through it every day. Traders, travelers, drifters, and the occasional creature that no one could name. Taiho was one of the first off the ship. He walked through the docking corridor with his hands in his pockets and a grin on his face like a boy let out of school. Behind him, Hayok, the ship's damage control specialist, walked with the heavy steps of a man who trusted nothing that wasn't bolted to a deck plate. Stop smiling, Hayok said. It's a supply station, not a vacation. Everything's a vacation if you want it to be, Taiho said. Hayok grunted. He was older than Taiho by 15 years, built like a cargo crate, with scars on his hands and a permanent frown carved into his face. He had served on warships before joining the Dawn Crest, and he carried that history in his shoulders. He did not like aliens. He did not say this out loud. Not anymore. Not after Do-Wan had spoken to him about it. But it sat behind his eyes like a door that was closed but not locked. The way station market was loud and bright and overwhelming. Stalls were stacked 3 levels high, selling food and fabric and technology and things that had no name in any human language. Taiho moved through the crowd like water, stopping to look at everything, talking to every vendor, buying small things with the little credit he had. He bought a bag of dried fruit for Suman because she never ate enough. He bought a small metal puzzle for Hyuk, who pretended not to want it and then put it in his pocket without a word. He bought sweet cakes for the engineering team and a jar of spiced tea for Captain Do-Wan. And then he stopped at a stall run by a quiet old alien with 6 arms who sold gloves and hand coverings for dozens of species. Taiho looked at the display for a long time. He picked up a pair made of thin insulating silk. Velhari grade, the vendor said. light as air but strong enough to block a moderate bioelectric current. They were pale blue, almost white, and they shimmered faintly in the station lights. He bought them without thinking about it too hard. He did not leave a note. He simply placed them outside Yuna's quarters when they returned to the ship and walked away. Yuna found them 2 hours later. She stood in her doorway and looked down at the small package on the floor. She picked it up carefully, opened it, and held the silk gloves up to the light. They were beautiful, far more delicate than anything she had ever allowed herself to wear. She ran her thumb across the fabric and felt how thin it was, how close to nothing. She knew who had left them. She did not know why. She put them in her drawer and closed it. Then she opened it again and touched them once more before closing it for good. The next day, Yuna walked through the common areas of the ship on her way to the med bay, and she saw them, the humans. She always saw them, but today she let herself watch. Taiho was sitting with Hyok in the mess hall. They had been arguing about something, engine calibrations probably, and Hyok's face was red with frustration. Taiho said something she could not hear, and then he reached over and clapped his hand on Hyok's shoulder. Not hard, not soft, just a firm, steady press that said, "Without words, I hear you." Hyuk's shoulders dropped half an inch. The argument was over. In the corridor, Sumin passed Taiho on her way to the medbay. Without breaking stride, she reached up and ruffled his hair. He ducked and laughed. She kept walking. It had taken less than a second, but something passed between them in that touch. Warmth, family, the knowledge that they belonged to each other in a way that did not need explanation. Two junior engineers shared a high five after fixing a stubborn relay. A navigation officer put her arm around a crying colleague who had received bad news from home. Everywhere Yuna looked, humans were touching each other, casually, constantly, without fear, without ritual, without permission. In the Galactic Cooperative, this was considered strange. Most species maintained strict physical boundaries. The Rethki communicated through sound, the Oranai through color, the Velhari through carefully controlled, deeply meaningful touch that was never ever given lightly. But humans touch like breathing. They did not seem to understand that it could be dangerous. Yuna watched and felt something pull inside her chest, a longing so old and so deep that she had forgotten it was there. On the second day at Way Station Maru, Yuna was walking through the lower docking level when she heard a crash. A heavy cargo crate had fallen from a loading crane and landed on its side, and beneath it, pinned and screaming, was a small Rethki dock worker. The creature was young, barely adult by Rethki standards, and its thin legs were trapped under the edge of the crate. It shrieked in a high, whistling voice that cut through the noise of the station. People stopped. People stared. No one moved. Then Taiho was there. He had been walking nearby, and he moved before anyone else could think. He ran to the crate, dropped to his knees, and got his hands under the edge. "Help me!" he shouted, and two dock workers rushed forward. Together, they lifted the crate just enough for Taiho to reach in and pull the Rethki free. The creature was shaking. Its legs were bruised but not broken, and it was crying in the thin, whistling way that Rethki cried. Taiho sat on the ground and held it. Just held it. The Rethki pressed its face against his chest, and Taiho put his arms around it and said quietly, "You're okay. I've got you. You're okay." Yuna stood 20 feet away. Her feet were frozen to the floor. Her hands were clenched inside her gloves, and her bioelectric current was humming beneath her skin, responding to the fear and the pain in the air. She wanted to move. She wanted to run forward and check the creature's injuries, to do what she was trained to do. She almost stepped forward. She did not. She stood there and watched a human do with his bare hands what she could not bring herself to do with all her training and all her skill. And the shame of it burned worse than any fire. That evening, a transmission came through to the Dawn Crest. Captain Dowan took it on the bridge. The face on the screen was Velhari, a female with cold, silver eyes and a formal crest of rank on her collar. Her name was June, and she sat on the Velhari High Oversight Council. "I am contacting you regarding the Velhari citizen known as Yuna," June said. Her voice was smooth and precise, like a blade being drawn slowly from a sheath. "She is severed. She is not permitted to serve in a medical capacity among other species. The Council demands her return to Velhari space to face a formal tribunal." Dowan sat in his captain's chair and looked at the screen with the calm, steady expression of a man who had heard many demands and agreed to very few. Yuna is a member of my crew, he said. She serves under cooperative charter. Your internal designations do not apply aboard my ship. Jun's eyes narrowed. She is a danger to your crew, Captain. Her touch is uncontrolled. She killed a child. I'm aware of her history, Dowan said. And I'm aware that she has served on 4 cooperative vessels without a single incident. My answer is no. Jun was silent for a long moment. The Council's patience has limits, Captain. Do not test them. The screen went dark. Dowan sat in the quiet bridge for a while after that. Then he called Suman and told her what had happened. Keep an eye on her, he said, and keep her safe. In her quarters, Yuna opened her drawer. She took out the silk gloves Taiho had left for her. She removed her heavy insulating gloves and slid the silk ones on instead. They were thin. They were light. She could feel the air through them, could almost feel the texture of her own skin. She stood in front of the mirror and flexed her fingers slowly, watching the faint glow of her current pulse beneath the silk. It was the closest she had come to bare hands in years. She did not take them off for a long time. The Dawn Crest had been back in open space for 6 days when the ship began to die. It started small. A coolant line in the lower engine compartment cracked during a routine pressure cycle. The crack was thin, no wider than a hair. But in space, small things killed. Coolant sprayed across a hot relay junction and vaporized instantly. And the vapor found a spark. And the spark found fuel. And in less than 90 seconds, the lower deck was burning. The alarms hit the ship like a hammer. Red lights flooded every corridor. The emergency system sealed bulkheads across 3 sections, trapping the fire, and trapping 7 crew members with it. Captain Dowan was on the bridge within a minute. He stood at the central display and watched the damage reports scroll across the screen. Fire in compartments 14, 15, and 16, coolant pressure dropping, atmosphere contamination rising. His face was stone. Damage control, report, he said into the comm. Hayek's voice came back, rough and steady. I'm on deck 4 with a team of 6. Fire's spreading faster than the suppression system can handle. The automated vents are jammed. I think the heat warped the housing. We need to go in manually. Who's with you? Taiho, Mirai, and 4 others. We're suiting up now. Dowan closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them. Go. Keep me updated every 2 minutes. On deck 2, the medbay was already filling with wounded. Crew members stumbled in with burns, smoke damage, and broken bones from the initial explosion. Yuna was there before Suman arrived, pulling on her heavy gloves, setting up triage stations with mechanical precision. Her face showed nothing. Her hands were steady. A human engineer came in first, a woman named Minji with burns across her shoulder and neck. Yuna directed her to a bed and began treatment, working with long instruments, keeping her hands at a careful distance. Minji was crying, not from pain but from shock, and she kept reaching for Yuna's arm. Please, Minji whispered. Can you just stay still, Yuna said. I need to treat the burns. Minji's hand fell back to the bed. Yuna worked faster. Suman arrived and took over the second triage station. She moved with the sharp efficiency of a woman who had patched soldiers together in worse places than this. She glanced at Yuna across the room and saw what she always saw. Perfect technique, perfect focus, and a distance between Yuna and her patients that was measured not in inches, but in years of fear. More wounded came. A Rethki with a crushed hand, a human with smoke in his lungs. Then 2 crew members carried in a Velhari engineer, a male named Doha, unconscious with severe burns across his chest and arms. His silver skin was blackened in patches, and his bioelectric channels were flickering erratically, surging and dimming like a dying light. Suman looked at Yuna. He needs Velhari-specific stabilization. You're the only one who can do it. Yuna looked at Doha on the table. A Velhari, her own kind. His channels were surging because his body was in crisis, and if those surges were not calmed, they would overload his nervous system and kill him. The standard treatment was touch. A trained Velhari medic would place their hands on the patient's chest and use their own current to steady the fluctuations, like one tuning fork calming another. It was basic Velhari medicine, Every medic learned it. Yuna had not touched another Velhari in 7 years. She pulled on a third layer of gloves. She positioned herself at the table and placed the stabilization pads on Doa's chest. Mechanical tools, not hands. She sent the calming frequency through the pads. It was not working. The pads could not match the subtle rhythm of a living bioelectric field. They were too blunt, too impersonal. Doha's vitals were dropping. Yuna's hands shook. She could feel his current through the table, through the pads, through 3 layers of gloves. Ashur, it was wild and frightened, a current that was screaming for help the way a drowning person screams for air. She pressed harder on the pads. She adjusted the frequency. She watched the monitors and saw the numbers falling and felt sweat running down her back beneath her suit. Then she did something she had not done in years. She placed her gloved hands directly on his chest. Through 3 layers of insulation, she pushed her own current toward his, gently, carefully, like whispering across a crowded room. It worked. Slowly, unevenly, his channels began to steady. The surges calmed. His heartbeat found a rhythm. The monitors climbed. Yuna stepped back from the table. Her entire body was shaking. She gripped the edge of the counter behind her and tried to breathe. Suman appeared beside her. Without asking, without warning, she put her hand on Yuna's shoulder and squeezed. Yuna flinched so hard she almost fell. Every muscle in her body went rigid. Her current spiked beneath her skin, and for one terrible moment, she felt it rushing toward the point of contact, toward Suman's hand. Suman did not let go. "You saved him, Yuna," Suman said. Her voice was low and firm. "Breathe." Yuna breathed. The current settled. Suman's hand stayed on her shoulder for 3 more seconds, and then she released it and walked back to her station. Yuna stood alone, trembling, and stared at the spot on her shoulder where a human hand had held her. She could still feel it. Not pain, not danger, just warmth. Simple, human warmth. She did not have time to think about it. The comm crackled and Hyok's voice filled the med bay. "Medical, we've got a problem down here. Where the fires reached compartment 16. That's the biosample storage bay. If those samples ignite, the gas they release will be toxic. It'll flood decks 3 through 5. Dowan's voice came over the comm. "Can you seal it remotely?" "Negative. The vent controls are manual. Someone has to go in and pull the lever to vent the compartment to space." Silence on the channel. Everyone on the ship understood what that meant. Compartment 16 was fully engulfed. The temperature inside was climbing past survivable levels. Whoever went in would be walking into a furnace. Taiho's voice came through, calm and clear. "I'll go." "Taiho," Hyuk started. "I'm the smallest one in a suit. I can move fastest." "Hyuk, you know I'm right." A long pause, then Hyuk's voice, rough as gravel. "Wait, you've got 4 minutes before the samples reach ignition temperature. Don't be slow." Dowan's voice. "Taiho, you are authorized. Be careful." "Always am, Captain." The channel went quiet. In the med bay, Yuna stood frozen with a burn kit in her hands. She was staring at the comm speaker on the wall as if she could see through it, through the decks, through the fire, to where a young human engineer was walking alone into the worst of it. She did not know why her chest hurt. She did not know why her current was humming beneath her skin like a wire about to snap. She did not know why her hands inside their 3 layers of gloves were curling into fists. The minutes passed like hours. The fire reports kept coming. Temperature rising, structural integrity falling, atmosphere in the surrounding compartments getting worse. Suman worked on a patient and kept one eye on the monitors. The whole medbay was holding its breath. Then the ship shuddered. A deep, heavy tremor ran through the floor, and the lights flickered. On the bridge, Dowan saw the alert flash across his screen. Secondary explosion in compartment 16. Hyuk's voice came through, cracked and desperate. "Tai-ho! Tai-ho! Respond!" Static. "Tai-ho! Do you copy?" Nothing. Yuna set the burn kit down on the counter. She stood very still, and she listened to the silence where Tai-ho's voice should have been. And she felt something inside her begin to change. Not break, not shatter, but shift, like a wall moving on its foundation, like a door that had been locked for 7 years beginning, slowly to open. She looked down at her gloves. She looked at the door. She waited. Taiho was alive. He knew this because everything hurt, and dead men do not feel pain. He was lying on his side in compartment 16, and the world around him was orange and black. The fire had eaten through the walls and the ceiling, and was now chewing on the floor beneath him. His suit had held through the first explosion, but the secondary blast had thrown him into a support column and cracked the left side of his helmet. Hot air was leaking in, and every breath tasted like metal and smoke. His left arm was burned badly. He could feel the skin pulling tight and the sharp, deep ache that meant the tissue beneath was damaged. But his arm still worked. He could still move his fingers. And that was what mattered because the manual vent lever was 15 feet away. And it was the only thing standing between the ship and a cloud of toxic gas that would kill everyone on decks 3 through 5. He got to his knees. The room swayed. He crawled. The vent lever was on the far wall, behind a panel that had partially melted. Taiho pulled himself up and grabbed the lever with both hands. It did not move. Heat had warped the housing, and the mechanism was jammed solid. He pulled harder. His burned arm screamed. The lever shifted half an inch. He braced his foot against the wall and pulled with everything he had. The lever groaned and then gave way all at once, slamming into the open position. The outer hull vent cracked open, and the compartment roared as the atmosphere rushed toward space. The biosamples, sealed containers of volatile organic compounds, were sucked toward the vent. So tumbling across the floor and out into the black, the toxic threat was gone. Taiho slumped against the wall. He had done it. The ship was safe. Then the floor buckled. A support beam, weakened by fire and the sudden pressure change, broke free from the ceiling and fell. It struck Taiho across the right leg and pinned him to the floor. The pain was blinding. He screamed into his helmet, and the sound was swallowed by the noise of the fire. He grabbed the beam with his good hand and pushed. It did not move. It was twice his weight, heated to a temperature that he could feel through his suit gloves, and it had his leg trapped at the knee. He was pinned. He was burning, and his comm was dead. The secondary explosion had killed it. He lay his head back against the floor and looked up at the fire eating the ceiling. He thought about Suman. She was going to be so angry with him. She was always angry when he got hurt, and she showed it by being efficient and sharp and refusing to look at him until she had finished treating whatever damage he had done. He loved that about her. He loved that her anger was just fear wearing a different face. He thought about Hyuk, who would blame himself. He thought about Do-won, who would write the letter home. He thought about the Rethki he had pulled from under the cargo crate at Waystation Maru, and he hoped the little creature was okay. Then strangely, he thought about Yuna. He thought about her standing behind her table in the medbay, her hands hidden inside those heavy gloves, her face so carefully blank that it had taken him 3 visits to realize it was not coldness. It was grief. And he thought about the silk gloves he had left at her door, and he wondered if she had kept them. The fire was getting closer. His suit was failing. He closed his eyes. 2 decks above, Yuna was staring at the medical monitor. Taiho's life signs were still active. Weak, irregular, but there. His suit beacon was transmitting his location inside compartment 16. His heart rate was dropping. His blood oxygen was falling. He was dying slowly in a room full of fire. Hyuk was shouting into the comm, organizing a rescue team, but the corridor to compartment 16 was blocked by collapsed debris. They would need cutting tools. It would take 10 minutes. Taiho did not have 10 minutes. Yuna stood very still. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the numbers, heart rate, oxygen level, body temperature, and she saw them falling. And she understood with a clarity that cut through every wall she had ever built that if she did not move right now, Taiho would die. She turned to Suman. "Where is the emergency access to Deck 4, Section 16? Suman looked up. The maintenance shaft on Deck 3. "But Yuna, it runs right through the fire zone. You can't—" "Where is it?" Suman stared at her. Something passed between them. Not understanding exactly, but recognition. Suman had seen this look before, on the faces of soldiers who had made a decision that could not be taken back. "Corridor 7, Panel 14. The code is 4471. Yuna pulled off her heavy outer gloves. She pulled off the second layer. She was wearing only the silk gloves, the thin, pale blue pair that Taiho had bought for her at Waystation Maru. They covered her hands like a second skin, and through them she could feel everything. The air, the cold counter, the heat rising from below. "Yuna!" Suman shouted. "Yuna, stop!" She did not stop. She walked out of the medbay and into the corridor. She moved fast, her long legs carrying her down the stairs to deck 3. The air was thicker here, warm and gray with smoke. The emergency lights cast everything in red. She found panel 14. She entered the code. The maintenance shaft opened, a narrow vertical tube that dropped straight down into the burning section of the ship. Heat rose from it like breath from a furnace. She could see the orange glow below. She climbed in and went down. The shaft was narrow enough that her shoulders brushed the walls. The metal was hot. She could feel it through her suit, watched it through the thin fabric of her sleeves. Her bioelectric current was alive beneath her skin, humming and surging in response to the heat and the fear and the adrenaline. She did not try to suppress it. She did not have time. She dropped out of the shaft into a corridor on deck 4. The fire was everywhere, crawling across the walls, dripping from the ceiling in streams of melting polymer. She pulled her collar over her mouth and moved through it. Her eyes, Velhari eyes made for low light, cut through the smoke better than any humans could. She found compartment 16. The door was buckled but not sealed. She forced it open with her shoulder and stepped inside. Taiho was on the floor. A beam lay across his leg. His helmet was cracked, and his face was pale beneath a layer of soot and sweat. His eyes were half closed, and he was barely conscious. Yuna dropped to her knees beside him. "Taiho!" His eyes opened. He looked up at her through the smoke and the heat and the haze, and for a moment he did not seem to understand what he was seeing. A Velhari woman, kneeling in fire, with bare silver hands inside silk so thin it might as well have been nothing. Then he smiled. It was small and it was broken, and it was the most human thing Yuna had ever seen. He lifted his hand, his burned, blistered, trembling hand. He did not reach for a tool or a rope or a beam. He reached for her, just her, his fingers stretched through the smoke and the heat, open and offered, asking for nothing except the thing that Yuna had sworn she would never give again. Touch. Yuna looked at his hand. She felt her current surge beneath her skin, felt it rise like a tide. Wife felt the old terror clawing at her. The boy on the table, the stopped heart, the silence, the scream that was not a scream. She reached back. Her fingers closed around his, silk against burned skin. Her current flared, bright, hot, electric. And for one terrible instant she felt it rush toward him like a wave about to crash. But it did not crash. It did not surge. It did not destroy. It flowed. Gently, softly, like water finding its level. Yuna's bioelectric current poured into Taiho's body and found the places where he was breaking. It numbed the pain in his burned arm. It steadied his heartbeat. It pushed oxygen into his blood and calmed the shock that was shutting his body down. She was not killing him. She was keeping him alive. Yuna stared at their joined hands and felt tears run down her face, one cutting tracks through the soot on her silver skin. She had not cried in 7 years. She had not touched another person in 7 years. And now she was doing both, in a burning room, on a dying ship, holding the hand of a human who had reached for her through fire because that was what humans did. They reached. They always reached. She released his hand and grabbed the beam across his leg. Her current surged into her muscles, a Velhari trait she had never used, the ability to channel bioelectricity into physical strength. She lifted the beam. It was impossibly heavy, burning hot, and she screamed with the effort. But she lifted it and threw it aside. Taiho gasped as the pressure released. His leg was damaged but not crushed. Yuna pulled his arm over her shoulder and hauled him to his feet. He was barely conscious, leaning almost his full weight against her. She could feel his heartbeat through his suit, fast and weak. She carried him, through the fire, through the corridor, back toward the shaft. She could not climb the shaft with him, so she went the long way. Through the burning hallways, following the emergency floor lights, her current flowing through her body like a river of light, keeping her strong, keeping her moving. At the bulkhead junction, a figure appeared through the smoke. Hyuk. He had cut through the debris from the other side. He saw Yuna carrying Taiho, and his face went through 5 expressions in 2 seconds. Shock, confusion, disbelief, understanding, and something that might have been respect. He took Taiho from her arms without a word and carried him the rest of the way. Yuna followed them through the cleared corridor, way up the stairs and into the medbay. Suman was waiting. She took one look at Taiho and went to work, her hands moving fast, her face tight. She did not cry. She would cry later, alone, where no one could see. Yuna stood in the corner of the medbay. Her suit was burned, her arms were scorched. The silk gloves on her hands were ruined. The left one had burned away entirely, and her bare silver hand glowed faintly in the dim light. The bioelectric channels pulsing with a rhythm that was, for the first time in 7 years, steady and calm. She looked at her hand. She looked at Taiho on the table, alive because she had touched him, alive because she had taken his hand through the fire. She pressed her bare palm against her own chest and felt her heart beating, and she wept silently, standing upright, not making a sound. While the woman she had been for 7 years crumbled to dust around her, and something new, something terrified and trembling and alive, began to take its place. Suman sat beside him for most of it. She read medical reports, ate protein bars she did not taste, and kept one hand resting on the edge of his bed, not touching him, just close, as if the nearness alone could hold him to the world. His burns were severe but healing. His leg was fractured in 2 places, but would mend. His lungs had taken smoke damage, but the filters were clearing it slowly, breath by breath. He was alive. That was the only number that mattered to Suman, and she checked it on the monitor every 4 minutes, like a prayer she could not stop saying. Yuna did not come to the medbay for those 2 days. She stayed in her quarters with the door locked. She sat on her bed and stared at her hands, one still covered in the remains of a burned silk glove, the other bare, the silver skin glowing softly with the hum of her bioelectric current. She had touched him. She had held his hand, and her current had flowed into him. And he had not died. He had lived. She had felt his heartbeat steady under her touch, felt his pain ease, felt his blood warm as her energy moved through him like sunlight through water. She had healed him. This should have brought her peace. Instead, it brought her a kind of terror she had never known. Worse than the guilt, worse than the exile, worse than 7 years of gloves and distance, because if she could heal, then the wall she had built was not protecting anyone. It was just a cage, and she had been sitting inside it, alone, for nothing. On the 3rd day, Suman came to her door. "He's awake," Suman said through the intercom. "He's asking for you." Yuna did not answer. "Yuna, open the door." A long silence. Then the lock clicked and the door slid open. Yuna stood in the doorway in a simple shirt and loose pants, her hands uncovered, her hair down. She looked like she had not slept. She looked like she had been crying. Suman studied her face for a moment. Then she said, "Come with me, not as your superior, as your friend." Yuna followed her to the medbay. Taiho was propped up in bed, his burned arm wrapped in a regeneration sleeve, his leg immobilized in a stabilizing brace. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But when he saw Yuna walk through the door, he smiled. It was the same smile he had given her in the fire. Small, tired, and entirely genuine. "Anna, hey," he said. Yuna stopped 3 feet from his bed. Her hands were at her sides, bare, trembling slightly. She did not know what to say. She had rehearsed words in her quarters, explanations, apologies, clinical descriptions of what had happened. But now, standing in front of him, all of those words seemed small and useless. Taiho looked at her. He did not look at her hands or her glowing skin or the place where her gloves should have been. He looked at her face. "You came," he said. "Not thank you. Not how did you do that. Not what happened. Just, you came." As if that was the only thing that mattered. As if the act of choosing to walk into the fire was more important than anything she had done inside it. Yuna's throat tightened. "I almost didn't." "But you did." She nodded. She could not speak. Taiho shifted in his bed and winced. "Suman says my leg will heal in 3 weeks. She also says I'm an idiot, but that's not new." He paused. She told me what you did. With your hands. She said you used your current to stabilize me. I did not plan it, Yuna said quickly. I did not know it would work. It could have, but it didn't. His voice was quiet. Yuna, it didn't. She closed her eyes. She pressed her lips together. She felt the current hum beneath her skin. Not surging, not threatening, just present, like a second heartbeat. Later that day, Suman asked Yuna to come to her office. She closed the door and sat down across from her, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she opened a file on her screen and turned it so Yuna could see. This is the medical report from the incident 7 years ago, Suman said. The child. I obtained it through cooperative medical records 6 months ago. I've been waiting for the right time to show you. Yuna stiffened. I do not want to. You need to. Suman's voice was not harsh, but it was firm. Yuna, the child had a congenital defect, a condition called channel fragmentation. It's rare even among Velhari. His bioelectric pathways were already unstable before you touched him. The surge that killed him was triggered by contact, yes, but any Velhari who touched him in that moment would have caused the same result. The senior medics who examined his body afterward confirmed it. It's in this report. Yuna stared at the screen. The words blurred. I was told, you were told you killed him, and you did in the most technical sense. Your touch was the final trigger, but the condition was already fatal. He was dying before you touched him, Yuna. The seizure was a symptom of the fragmentation. With or without your hand, he had minutes, maybe less. Yuna's breathing had stopped. She sat in her chair like a statue, her bare hands gripping her knees, her bioelectric channels flickering erratically beneath her skin. The council knew this, she whispered. I don't know what the council knew, but this report was available. It was filed. Someone chose not to share it with you. Yuna thought of June. She thought of the formal declaration of severing, the cold words spoken in a cold room, the way no one had looked at her as she walked out. She thought of 7 years of gloves, 7 years of flinching, 7 years of believing her hands were weapons. She broke. It was not dramatic. There was no scream, no collapse. She simply bent forward in her chair, pressed her forehead against her knees, and wept. The sobs were quiet and deep, pulled from a place so far inside her that they seemed to come from the ground beneath her. Suman sat beside her and placed one hand on her back gently and held it there while Yuna cried for the child she thought she had murdered, for the years she had lost, for the woman she might have been if someone had shown her this report when it mattered. They sat like that for a long time. Words spread through the dawn crest the way all news spreads on a ship, unevenly, in whispers, in glances. The Velhari medic had run into the fire. The Velhari medic had carried a human out. The Velhari medic had used her bare hands to keep him alive. The crew's response was not uniform. Some were awed, some were confused. The Velhari engineer Doha, still recovering from his own burns, said nothing but looked at Yuna with something that might have been recognition. One Velhari seeing another for the first time. Hyuk came to the medbay on the 4th day. He stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in the way that large, proud men look uncomfortable when they are about to say something that costs them. Yuna was restocking supplies. She saw him and paused. I owe you an apology, he said. His voice was gruff. When you first came aboard, I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong. Yuna looked at him. You do not owe me anything. Yeah, I do. He shifted his weight. You went into a fire for one of ours. That means something? That means you're one of ours too. He nodded once sharply and left. Yuna stood alone in the medbay holding a box of bandages and felt something warm bloom in her chest. Not her current, not electricity, but something older and simpler. Belonging. That evening, a second transmission came from the Velhari High Oversight Council. June's face filled the bridge screen, and this time her expression was not cold. It was furious. We have received reports that the severed citizen Yuna used uncontrolled bioelectric contact on an alien crew member, June said. This is a direct violation of her terms of exile. A Velhari enforcement vessel, the Silent Decree, has been dispatched. She will be taken into custody for tribunal. Dowan stood on his bridge, hands behind his back, face calm. How long until the ship arrives? 48 hours. Dowan nodded. Acknowledged. The screen went dark. Dowan turned to his officers. She's one of our, he said. The same words Hiok had used, spoken with the same weight. We don't hand over our people. In the med bay, Suman told Yuna what was coming. Yuna listened, and her face was still, and her bare hands rested on the counter in front of her. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not reach for her gloves. The silent decree arrived exactly on schedule. The Velhari did everything on schedule. It dropped out of faster-than-light travel at a distance of 2,000 kilometers and held position like a predator sitting outside a den. It was beautiful in the way that all Velhari things were beautiful. Long, curved, silver-white, shaped like a blade laid flat against the dark. It was also 3 times the size of the Dawn Crest and carried enough firepower to reduce the research vessel to scrap in under a minute. Captain Dowan stood on the bridge and looked at it through the main viewport. Beside him, his navigation officer, a young human woman named Yunbi, reported the readings with a voice that was trying very hard not to shake. Weapons are powered but not locked, Yunbi said. They're holding at a neutral distance. Standard Velhari intimidation posture. Dowan nodded. They don't want to fight. They want us to be afraid. Is it working? Dowan looked at her. Are you afraid? Yes, sir. Good. That means you're paying attention. Hold position. The hail came within minutes. Jun's face appeared on the bridge screen. Perfect, composed, silver-skinned, her council crest gleaming at her collar. Behind her, the bridge of the silent decree was visible, sleek, dim, and silent. Everything about the Velhari was controlled. Everything was measured. Nothing was wasted, least of all emotion. Captain Dowan, Jun said, I trust you have reconsidered. I have not. Jun's eyes narrowed by a fraction. This is not a negotiation. Yuna is a Velhari citizen. She was declared severed by the High Oversight Council. She has violated the terms of her exile by making unsanctioned bioelectric contact with a non-Velhari individual. Under our law, this requires immediate tribunal. Under Galactic Cooperative Charter, Dowan replied, crew members serving aboard registered vessels are subject to the jurisdiction of that vessel's commanding officer. Yuna serves on my ship. She is under my authority. Your charter does not override Velhari internal law, and your internal law does not extend beyond your territory. We are an open space, counselor. Cooperative space. The silence between them was heavy and sharp. Jun's gaze moved slowly across the bridge, taking in the human crew, the small ship, the lack of weapons. Yuna could feel the weight of that gaze even through the screen, even 2 decks away where she stood in the corridor outside the bridge, listening through the intercom. Captain, Jun said, her voice dropping to something quieter and more dangerous. I have 300 crew members and a weapons array that could cut your ship in half. I do not wish to use force, but I will not be defied by a research vessel with a crew of 60. Dowan did not blink. More than you will have to explain to the Cooperative Council why a Velhari warship destroyed an unarmed research vessel over a personnel dispute. I imagine that will be an interesting conversation. Another silence. Jun's jaw tightened. 48 hours, Jorban, she said. I will hold position for 48 hours. If Yuna has not been transferred to my custody by then, I will take further action. The screen went dark. Dowan exhaled slowly. He turned to Suman, who had been standing at the back of the bridge, arms folded. Further action, Suman repeated. What does that mean? It means she doesn't know yet, Dowan said. She's bluffing. The Velhari don't start wars over single individuals, but they also don't back down once they've committed publicly. She needs a way out that doesn't look like retreat. In the corridor, Yuna had heard everything. She pressed her back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. The ship was in danger because of her. The crew, these people who had called her one of theirs, who had put their hands on her shoulders and said she belonged, they were standing between her and a warship, and they would not move. She could not let them do this. She went to her quarters and began packing. It did not take long. She had very little. Clothes, a few medical techs, the burned remains of a silk glove. She put everything into a single bag and walked toward the docking bay. Taiho was waiting in the corridor. He was leaning against the wall with his weight on his good leg, his burned arm held carefully at his side. He should have been in bed. He should not have been standing, but he was standing. Odder because he had seen her leave her quarters with a bag, and he knew what that meant. "Don't," he said. Yuna stopped. "Move, Taiho." "No. They will destroy this ship." "They won't. You don't know that. I know Dowan, and I know them." He gestured vaguely toward the rest of the ship, toward the crew. "They didn't choose to protect you because they calculated the odds, Yuna. They chose it because it's the right thing to do. And if you walk out that airlock, you're telling them they were wrong." Yuna's hand tightened on the strap of her bag. "I am trying to protect you." "No." Taiho's voice was quiet but steady. "You're trying to make it easier to keep hurting yourself. You think if you go back there and let them punish you, at least the guilt will make sense again. At least you'll be the person who deserves it. Because that's easier than believing you deserve to stay." Yuna felt the words hit her like a physical blow. Her current surged beneath her skin, and the lights in the corridor flickered once. She gripped her bag with both hands and stared at the floor. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I understand enough. I understand that you ran into a fire for me. I understand that you held my hand, and it didn't kill me. I understand that you've been punishing yourself for 7 years for something that wasn't your fault. And now you want to go back to the people who told you it was your fault and let them do it again." Yuna looked up at him. Her eyes were bright with tears that she would not let fall. "What if they're right? What if I am dangerous?" Taiho pushed himself off the wall. He took one step toward her, and then another, until he was close enough to touch. He lifted his hand, his right hand, the one that was not burned, the one that had reached for her through the fire, and he held it out between them, open, palm up, fingers still. "Then be dangerous," he said. "Be dangerous and stay anyway." Yuna looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She felt the current hum beneath her skin, and she felt the fear, and beneath the fear she felt something else, something that had been buried so deep and for so long that she had forgotten its name. She dropped the bag. She took his hand. Her bare fingers closed around his, and her current flowed into him. Warm, gentle, steady. Not a surge, not a flood. Just a connection, simple and real, like a bridge built between two people who had decided, separately and together, on that the distance between them was no longer acceptable. They stood like that in the corridor for a long time. Later in Suman's office, a plan took shape. Suman, Dowan, Yuna, and Taiho sat around the small table, and Suman laid it out. "There's a Velhari tradition called the Testimony of Hands," she said. "It's old, pre-council, from the era before touch was regulated. A severed individual can invoke it to challenge their status. The requirement is simple. The severed must demonstrate publicly that their touch brings life instead of death." Yuna's eyes widened. "That right has not been invoked in 200 years, which means no one has formally abolished it either. It's still in the legal code. If you invoke it, June has to witness it. If the demonstration succeeds, the council cannot enforce the severing without overturning their own ancient law. And doing that publicly, in front of the cooperative, would be a political disaster." Dowan leaned forward. "We broadcast it, open channel, cooperative-wide. We make it impossible for them to hide." Yuna was quiet for a long time. She looked at her hands resting on the table. Bare, uncovered. The faint glow of her channels pulsed softly in the dim room. "If I fail," she said, "if my current surges and I hurt someone—" "You won't," Taiho said. She looked at him. "You cannot know that." "No," he said, "but I know you, and I'll be the first one to stand in front of you when you do it." Yuna held his gaze. Then she nodded. "I will invoke the testimony of hands," she said, "not for the council. Not for June." She looked down at her hands and flexed her fingers. "For me." The Bridge of the Dawn crest was not built for ceremonies. It was a working space. Consoles, screens, cables bundled overhead, the faint smell of recycled air and engine heat. But on this day, it became something more. Dowan had the main viewport cleared to show the stars. Yumbi opened a broadcast channel. Wideband, cooperative-wide, routed through every relay station within range. The signal would reach 100 worlds. Anyone who was listening would hear what happened next. The crew of the Dawn Crest gathered on the bridge and in the corridors outside. All 60 of them. Humans, Rethke, a handful of Oranai, and one Velhari engineer named Doha, who stood at the back with his arms folded and said nothing. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the open space at the center of the bridge, where a single chair had been placed facing the viewport. On the other side of the black, the silent decree hung in the dark. Its weapons were still powered, its shields were still up, but its communication array was open, and on its bridge, June watched the broadcast feed with her hands clasped behind her back and her face made of stone. Yuna walked onto the bridge alone. She wore no gloves, no long sleeves, no high collar. For the first time since she had left Velhari space, her skin was uncovered. Silver, luminous, the faint tracery of bioelectric channels glowing softly beneath the surface, like veins of light in polished marble. She wore a simple white shirt and dark pants. Her hair was pulled back from her face. Her feet were bare. She looked stripped. She looked exposed. Why, she looked for the first time in 7 years like herself. She walked to the center of the bridge and stood in front of the viewport, facing the stars and the watching warship and the thousand silent listeners across the galaxy. She breathed in. She breathed out. Then she spoke. My name is Yuna. I am Velhari. 7 years ago, I was declared severed by the High Oversight Council for the death of a child under my care. I accepted that judgment. I believed I was dangerous. I believed that my touch could only destroy. Her voice was steady. Her hands were at her sides, open, the channels glowing faintly. For 7 years I wore gloves. I kept my distance. I did not touch another living being. I served as a medic and I helped people, but I did it from behind instruments and barriers and fear. I told myself it was enough. I told myself it was right. She paused. The bridge was silent. It was not enough, and it was not right. I was not protecting anyone. I was hiding. I was hiding from the belief that my hands were weapons, and I let that belief become the only thing I was. She lifted her chin. Her eyes, pale silver, glowing faintly in the bridge light, found the camera that was transmitting to the silent decree. Today I invoke the testimony of hands. This is my right under Velhari law, a right that predates the council and that has never been revoked. I will demonstrate, publicly, that my touch brings life. I will prove that I am not what I was told I am. She lowered her hands and waited. Taiho stepped forward. He walked from the front row of the crew to the center of the bridge, limping slightly on his healing leg, his burned arm out of its sleeve. Once he stopped in front of Yuna and stood straight. I'll go first, he said. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a man offering what he had always offered, himself without condition. He held out both hands. Yuna looked at him. She looked at his hands. The right one scarred from engine work, the left one still pink and tender from the burns he had gotten in the fire. She looked at his face and saw no fear. None. Just trust, open and simple and complete. The kind of trust that humans seem to carry in their bones like calcium, like something they were built from. She placed her hands against his. The bioelectric current flowed. It was visible this time, a soft, warm light that bloomed where their skin met and spread outward in gentle waves, tracing the lines of Yuna's channels and then reaching into Taiho's body like fingers of light pressing gently into warm earth. On the bridge monitors, the medical display showed his vitals in real time. Heart rate steady, blood pressure normal, cellular repair accelerating at the sites of his burns. The light pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then settled into a steady glow. Yuna's current was not surging. It was not wild. It was flowing the way water flows downhill, naturally, inevitably, toward the place where it was needed. She held his hands for 10 seconds. Then she released them. Taiho flexed his fingers and looked at his burned arm. The skin was visibly smoother. The pain lines around his eyes had softened. He smiled at her, small and proud, and stepped back. A second passed. Then Hyok moved. The big man walked forward from the second row, his boots heavy on the deck plates. He stopped in front of Yuna and looked down at her with the expression of a man who was reconsidering every assumption he had ever made. Then, without a word, he held out his scarred right hand. Yuna took it. The light bloomed again, Gentler this time, briefer, but unmistakable. Yuck's vitals appeared on the monitor. Stable. Improved. His chronic shoulder pain, a souvenir from his years on warships, eased for the first time in a decade. He blinked, rolled his shoulder, and stared at Yuna with something close to wonder. He nodded once and stepped back. Suman came next. She walked forward with the brisk efficiency of a woman who did not have time for ceremony, but understood its importance. She took Yuna's hands and held them firmly. Doctor to doctor, and the light flowed between them. On the monitor, Suman's elevated stress hormones dropped by half. Her chronic tension headache released. She squeezed Yuna's hands once and let go. Then the Rethke engineer, the small one with the repaired hand from the fire, scurried forward. He was barely tall enough to reach Yuna's hands, so she knelt. She placed her fingers against his small, warm palm, and the light was the softest yet, like candlelight through glass. The Rethke chirped happily and patted her hand with his other palm before running back to the crowd. One by one they came. Yunbi, Minji, 3 engineers from the lower decks, an Oranai communications officer who had never touched anyone outside his own species, Uni, a human cook who had been afraid of Velhari since childhood and who closed his eyes when Yuna took his hand and opened them again, looking like he had been given a gift he did not know how to name. Doha came last. The Velhari engineer walked forward slowly, and the bridge went very quiet. Velhari touching Velhari. This was different. This was the thing that Yuna had been forbidden to do, the thing that had defined her exile. Doha stopped in front of her and extended his hand. His channels were glowing in response to hers. A Velhari instinct. 2 currents recognizing each other. Yuna hesitated. Then she took his hand. The light that bloomed between them was brighter than any that had come before, not because it was more powerful, but because it was more complete. 2 Velhari currents, flowing together, finding harmony. The monitors showed both of their vitals synchronizing, heartbeats aligning, bioelectric frequencies merging into a single, steady rhythm. It was the most fundamental Velhari act of connection, and it was happening on the bridge of a human ship, broadcast to the galaxy. Doha held her hand for a long moment. Then he released it, placed his fist over his heart, a Velhari gesture of deep respect, and stepped back. The bridge was silent. Every face in the room was turned toward Yuna. She stood in the center, her bare hands at her sides, her channels glowing with a warm, steady light. She was trembling, but she was not afraid. She was not hiding. She was standing in the open, fully seen, for the first time in 7 years. On the silent decree, Jun watched. Her face had changed over the course of the demonstration. The stone had cracked, marred slowly from the inside. She had seen Yuna's current flow into human after human without harm. She had seen it heal. She had seen a severed woman touch a Velhari and produce not destruction, but harmony. The broadcast channel was still open. Jun knew that every word she spoke would be heard across the cooperative. She knew that the council was watching. She knew that her career, her authority, and her standing were balanced on the edge of what she said next. She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke. Stand down weapons. Power down shields. Her officers looked at her. She did not repeat herself. She did not need to. She opened a direct channel to the Dawn Crest. Yuna's face appeared on her screen, and Jun looked at the woman she had exiled. The woman she had once known as a child, before the council, before the severing, and before everything went wrong. I did not know you could do that, Jun said. Her voice was quiet. Not warm, not forgiving, but changed. None of us did. She paused. The enforcement action is withdrawn. The council will receive my report. I cannot promise what they will decide, but I will tell them what I saw. The channel closed. The silent decree turned slowly in the dark and began to move away, its silver hull catching the starlight as it went. On the bridge of the Dawn Crest, no one moved for a moment. Then Taiho started clapping. It was uneven and awkward because of his burned hand, and it was the loudest sound in the room. Hyuk joined in, then Suman, then Yunbi, then everyone. Clapping, stamping, the Rethke whistling, and the Oranai flashing their colors. A noise that was messy and human, and beautiful, and entirely inappropriate for a Velhari ceremony. Yuna stood in the center of it and cried. She did not hide it. She let the tears run down her silver face and drip onto the deck, and she laughed through them, a sound she barely recognized as her own. The dawn crest resumed its course. Life returned to its rhythms. Shifts changed, meals were cooked, reports were filed, arguments were had and settled. But something had shifted, some invisible axis that ran through the heart of the ship. Una walked the corridors without gloves. She treated patients with her hands, still careful, still precise, but present now, connected, her fingers sometimes brushing a patient's wrist or steadying a shoulder. Each touch was small. Each one was an earthquake. Days later, a new crew member arrived at the medbay for an intake exam. He was young, a fresh recruit, nervous, still wearing his academy patch. He stood in the doorway and fidgeted. Una looked up from her work. She set down her instrument. She walked around the table, and for the first time in 7 years, she extended her bare hand in greeting. An open palm, offered freely in the way that humans did. A gesture she had learned not from her people, but from a species that the galaxy considered reckless and strange and primitive. A species that reached. "Welcome aboard," she said. "I'm Una." The recruit looked at her hand. He hesitated for only a moment. Then he took it. Una's fingers closed gently around his. Her current hummed. Warm, steady, alive. And it flowed between them like a quiet promise. Like a door that had been opened and would never be closed again. She did not let go.